You can't take a blood sample from someone who died 300,000 years ago. There's nothing left to prick and no vein to find, because the blood dried up, crumbled to dust, and blew away on the wind long before the first spoken word, the first plowed field, and the first wheel. And yet, scientists will calmly tell you exactly what blood type the very first humans on Earth had, which raises a fair question. How could they possibly know, if not a single drop of that blood survived? The strange thing is that your own blood type feels like just about the most boring detail about your body. Nothing more than a letter on a medical form or a line on a donor card you filled in once and forgot. But that letter is about to trip you up, because almost everything you think you know about it turns out to be wrong. And that goes double if you're type O, the most ordinary and most common blood on the planet. It isn't a medical footnote. It's a record that showed up before humanity and even before our own species. One that reaches back to a time far more ancient than anything you'd normally call ancient. And it has outlasted empires, ice ages, and entire species of humans while still running through you today. So what was it in the very first people? And why have you been told your whole life that O is the norm? To answer that, you don't actually need the ancient body at all, because the blood type system is older than any single body, and by a wide margin. Blood groups were first discovered by a Viennese physician named Karl Landsteiner back in 1901, and he later won a Nobel Prize for it. But the A, B, and O system itself was never a human invention. It was around long before us, and it lives on perfectly well in chimpanzees, gorillas, bonobos, orangutans, and even in the gibbons swinging through the trees who have never once filled out a medical form. In 2012, a geneticist named Laure Seguerel and her team compared these genes across a whole range of primates, and the result stung our pride a little. The A and B groups you think of as strictly human were already circulating in our furry relatives at least 20 million years ago, long before anyone stood up on two legs and called themselves human. Once that sinks in, you get a strange picture, because your blood type is older than your species and predates the entire human branch of the tree. It isn't really yours, and it isn't even really human. It's something handed down to you from an ancestor you'll never meet, like an old cabinet in your house that just sits there while nobody remembers who bought it. Right now, somewhere up in a tree, there's a gibbon carrying the same version of the gene you do. So the first humans didn't choose their blood, they inherited it like everything else. And the only real question is which type they got. Here's where you'd probably bet on the wrong horse, because if you asked at random, almost everyone would say, "Oh, obviously." It's the simplest and the most common, and it's called the universal donor, so it feels logical that O must be the foundation, the blank page everything else was drawn on top of. It sounds convincing, and it's wrong, because genetically, O isn't the foundation at all. It's the newest version of the lot. The ancient gene is A, the same one the apes still carry, and O shows up when that gene breaks. In the most common case, O is literally a single missing letter in the code, a tiny typo that shuts the whole factory down, so the cell rolls off the line bare and stripped of its markings. Your celebrated universal donor isn't the bedrock then, but a factory defect that spread across half the planet. And it didn't happen just once, because that same switch got flipped again and again in different corners of the world and independently, as if humanity kept stepping on the very same rake. So O isn't the beginning of the story, it's a twist in it. And if the first humans leaned toward anything, it certainly wasn't the humble O you just put your money on. Apis on their own still aren't the final answer. And to get closer, scientists needed someone almost human. Someone whose blood you obviously can't draw anymore, but whose DNA you can. Since DNA is far tougher than blood and hides inside bones and teeth for tens of thousands of years. In 2021, the paleoanthropologist Sylvana Condemi and her colleagues in France did exactly that. pulling the blood type gene straight out of the remains of our closest extinct relatives, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, who lived between 40 and 100,000 years ago. Nobody guessed their type from the shape of a skull. The scientist read the instruction itself, letter by letter. The very stretch of code that in you decides whether the nurse writes down A, B, or O. For a long time, people assumed these ancient humans were all type O as the most primitive baseline, but it turned out to be the opposite. The Neanderthals had the full set, A, B, and O, the same spread we have today. And that diversity was built into their blood hundreds of centuries before us. There's a detail here that makes your eye twitch a little, because that plus sign in O positive is the rhesus factor, and it's named after a monkey, the rhesus macaque it was first found in back in 1940. So you've spent your whole life carrying a monkey's name on your card without ever realizing it. The Neanderthals had their own version of that rhesus factor, one that has almost completely vanished from modern humans and survives only in a small number of people in Australia and Papua New Guinea, and scientists cautiously suspect it may have helped finish them off, because blood incompatibility between mother and child was killing infants, while an already small population quietly faded. Science will probably never get closer to drawing blood from an ancient human than this, and that test says the same thing every time. There was never one neat answer, because they didn't have a single blood type. They had a whole set. Put all of it together, and you finally reach the answer to the question in the title. What blood type did the first humans have? Definitely not the O you bet on, because the oldest ancestral version was closer to A, sitting inside a system that was already old and already mixed, while O in that deck was more of a wild card than the base of it. And then disease started driving it, because your blood type isn't just a label, it's more like a door, and every germ carries a different key. In 2007, a malaria researcher named Alexandra Rowe in Edinburgh showed how it works. In people with type O, red blood cells are less likely to clump together around the malaria parasite, and it's those clumps that most often kill. So it genuinely pulled people through severe malaria, and wherever the disease was killing by the thousand, that group quietly gained ground generation after generation until it was everywhere. But that same O has a flip side, because it turned out to be an open door for cholera and for the stomach infection behind ulcers. So in some places it was rewarded, and in others just as quietly weeded out. Your plain, everyday O positive isn't the blood we started with. It's the blood that ancient epidemics rewrote into us, one outbreak at a time. Every time a plague swept through a village and left the O carriers a little more alive than their neighbors, the whole bloodline shifted by a notch. And nobody chose it or even noticed, because the plague itself was doing the editing. And O simply happened to be the draft that survived in the places we now live. So your ordinary O isn't the base that everything started from. It's the most recent edit in a text that was being written long before us. The same blood ran through apes in the trees 20 million years before the first humans and reached you almost unchanged. And it's just one line out of a vast archive you carry inside you, because nearly your entire body is covered in records just as ancient. And so far, we've managed to decode barely a couple of % of them. We've learned to read the blood, and the rest is still silent.